The HOA fined me for using the lake I inherited. When the HOA tried controlling my 2,100-acre lake, they didn't know I'd inherited the water rights stretching back to 1893. I walked into that fight thinking it was just another HOA headache. Turns out it was a full-blown power grab waiting to explode. If you've ever dealt with folks who thought a clipboard made them king, stick with me. This one gets real fast. And if you love seeing justice land where it should, hit subscribe and stay with the channel. There's plenty more coming. The wind coming off the water was the kind that carried memory in it. Sharp, clean, carrying the scent of pine pitch and cold Wyoming mornings. I hadn't stood on my family's old dock in nearly 20 years, but the wood still creaked under my boots the same way it did when I was a kid. Sunlight caught on the ripples across Silvercrest Lake, turning the surface into a sheet of hammered glass. For a moment, I let myself believe this place was exactly as my grandfather left it, quiet, honest, untouched. Then a white SUV barreled down my gravel road like it owned the land. Dust exploded behind it. Tires slid. And just like that, any piece I'd hoped for cracked right down the middle. The engine cut off with a sharp click. The driver's door opened with the kind of authority only a person used to being obeyed would use. Out stepped Bethany Reed, mid-50s, stiff shoulders, bright pink blazer so loud it looked allergic to sunlight. Her heels sank into the dust, but she held her chin high as she marched toward me with the clipboard hugged to her chest. I'd never met her before. Didn't need to. I'd seen the type. "Mr. Cole?" she called in a tone that suggested she didn't actually care who I was. I turned slowly, giving myself one last look at the lake before dealing with whatever this was. "That's me," I said. She didn't offer a handshake, just thrust a paper forward like it might burn her if she held it too long. "Effective immediately, you owe the Lakeshore Estates HOA a $600 monthly lake access fee. Additionally, this dock," she pointed at the century-old planks my great-grandfather built, "must be removed within 30 days. I stared at her, then at the paper, then back at her. "I'm sorry. You're fining me for using my own lake?" Bethany blinked, slow and patronizing. "It isn't your lake, Mr. Cole. It is a community feature maintained under HOA oversight. You'll need to comply with regulations just like everyone else." If the absurdity didn't hit first, the arrogance did. I stepped off the dock and walked toward her, stopping close enough to smell her perfume, something floral and aggressively expensive. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "I inherited this lake, the whole thing. Every acre of water, every inch of shoreline, and the dam feeding it." Bethany's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm afraid the rules disagree." She tapped the paper. Something in me tightened. I took it from her and read the header. "Lakeshore Estates HOA, Notice of Violation Dock Non-Compliance, Unauthorized Water Use, Failure to Register Shoreline Structure." It went on and on and on. Somewhere around potential foreclosure proceedings, I stopped reading. "You're serious?" I said. "Of course I am." She clasped her hands behind her back. "Lakeshore Estates prides itself on maintaining a certain standard. Recreational structures must meet our design guidelines. Boat usage must be approved. And lake access, because it is a shared resource, requires monthly fees to ensure environmental responsibility." I turned, looking out over the massive stretch of water. Pine trees lined the far shore in rows that had been there longer than electricity. A single hawk circled above the eastern ridge. Nothing about this lake was shared. My family built the original dam in 1893. They maintained the land. They paid the taxes. They watched over the water for generations. Bethany Reed knew none of that. Worse, she didn't care. "You might want to check your records," I said, "because this lake isn't governed by your HOA." Her expression hardened like wet cement left in the sun. "Mr. Cole, We will not tolerate residents claiming exceptions. You are now part of this community, whether you understand the rules or not. This lake," she gestured around us as if she were the one who built it, "belongs to everyone who lives here." I folded the violation notice and tucked it into my back pocket. "No," I said quietly. "It doesn't." Her eyes narrowed. "Then I suggest you prepare for escalating fines." She walked back toward her SUV, each step radiating self-importance. The door slammed shut. The engine roared back to life. But before she drove off, she rolled down her window and delivered the line she'd clearly been saving. "This lake belongs to the community, not you." The gravel spit out under her tires as she sped away, leaving a cloud of dust drifting across my dock. I watched her vanish down the road, heart pounding slower than anger, but faster than wisdom. The violation paper crackled against my jeans in the cold breeze. A question settled into my chest, like a stone sinking in deep water. If she was willing to fine the lake owner, what else was she willing to do? And more importantly, what didn't she know about me or this lake? By the time the dust from Bethany's SUV finally settled back onto the gravel, the Wyoming sun had shifted higher, turning the lake into a pale blue mirror that shimmered with a kind of quiet warning. I walked the length of the dock again, slowly, feeling every creak of the boards, every sway under my boots, trying to temper the anger building in my chest. But the more I replayed her words, the more absurd the whole thing became. An HOA fee for my lake, the same lake my great-grandfather dammed with his own hands. I climbed up the path toward my cabin, a weathered timber structure with a tin roof that whistled whenever the wind tunneled off the ridge. The front porch sagged a little, sun-warmed boards soft beneath years of boots and winters. I dropped the violation notice onto the porch table. The paper looked out of place, the crisp, bright white printing against old pine that smelled like rain and sap. I needed information, not outrage. Information. I grabbed my phone, snapped a picture of the notice, and sent it to my neighbor, Jake Mercer, a local carpenter who lived a quarter mile up the dirt road. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. "Jake. Dude, you need to get ahead of this. Bethany's been running people out of here for years. Better watch your back." Not exactly comforting. I headed inside, poured myself a cup of burnt black coffee from the pot I'd forgotten on the stove since yesterday, and sat at the old oak table. The violation notice glared back at me like a challenge. $600 a month for lake access, a removal order for my dock, a threat of future legal action. Bethany didn't issue warnings. She issued ultimatums. The cabin felt too quiet, just the soft hum of the old refrigerator and the distant cries of geese cutting across the lake. I checked the HOA's website, which looked like someone built it using leftover cardboard and pride. And there it was. HOA Rule Amendment 14B, Community Waterway Oversight. The lake is hereby designated a shared community asset. All residents must register docks, boats, and water usage. Monthly access fees apply. Date enacted. 2 months ago. Right before I inherited the land. My jaw tightened. They were planning something long before I ever set foot back on this property. I stepped outside again, breathing in the crisp air. Off in the distance, an ATV buzzed, one of the HOA's volunteer patrols cruising the perimeter like they were guarding a national border. They slowed when they spotted me, lifted a phone and snapped a picture. I raised a hand. They didn't wave back. Instead, the ATV disappeared behind the trees, leaving only the smell of gasoline and dust. I muttered to myself, "Real friendly neighborhood you've built here, Bethany." The crunch of gravel behind me broke my train of thought. A cruiser rolled up, dark blue Wyoming County Sheriff glistening in the sunlight. Sheriff Marcus Hale stepped out. Tall guy, weathered face, The kind of handshake that told you he'd spent years working fences and nights on cold highways. He took off his hat and nodded. "Morning, Remy." "Hope this isn't about the dock already," I said. Marcus shook his head. "Got a call from someone, anonymous of course, saying you were conducting unauthorized construction on HOA property." I looked around pointedly at my empty yard. "I'm drinking coffee." "That's what I told dispatch," Marcus said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I figured I'd swing by anyway. Been a busy week for complaints." I paused. "Complaints?" 3 yesterday. 2 this morning." His eyes drifted toward the lake. "All from numbers tied to Lakeshore HOA. The cold breeze off the water suddenly felt sharper. "Let me guess, Bethany?" Marcus didn't answer directly. Sheriffs rarely did. Instead, he lowered his voice just enough for the words to feel weighted. "They're targeting you, Remy, and they don't know what you really own." The way he said it, steady, matter-of-fact, landed like a stone in my gut. I reached for the violation notice on the porch table and handed it to him. "She's fining me for my own lake." Marcus let out a slow whistle. "This is going to get messy. HOA's been grabbing at authority they don't have. Folks too scared or tired to push back. But you," he looked at me long, eyes narrowing, "you've got history here, and something tells me Bethany has no idea what kind of man you are." "An annoyed one," I muttered. "For starters." Marcus folded the notice, handing it back. "Be careful. She doesn't like people who don't fall in line. Good thing I'm not here to fall in line." He cracked a faint smile, then tipped his hat and headed back to his cruiser. Gravel crunched as he pulled away, fading into the trees. I stood on the porch with the violation paper in my hand and the lake stretching out behind me. The sky had deepened into that high noon cobalt, sharp and endless, the way it only looks at high altitude. A gust of wind stirred the pine needles, scattering them across the porch boards. Everything felt off. The HOA claiming a lake they didn't build. A rule passed right before my return. Patrols watching me. Calls flooding the sheriff. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't over-eager regulation. This was coordinated. I ran my thumb over the rough edge of the violation notice. "Fine me all you want, Bethany. But you can't regulate what you don't own, and you definitely don't own this lake." But as I watched another HOA ATV creep along the shoreline, zooming in with their phone, I understood something clearly. They weren't done. And the next move wouldn't be a fine. It would be something bigger, something planned, something dangerous. I looked back at the dock, at the pine trees, at the quiet water my family had guarded for over a century. "All right then," I murmured, "if it's war you want." The wind shifted, lifting the edges of the violation notice like a warning flag. "You picked the wrong lake owner." By the next morning, the warning proved truer than I wanted to believe. I stepped onto the porch with a mug of hot coffee, the kind strong enough to peel paint, and nearly tripped over a stack of envelopes sitting on the welcome mat. Bright white, perfectly aligned, each stamped with the Lakeshore Estates HOA logo, a pine tree with roots shaped like a $sign. I picked up the stack, the weight of it telling me everything I needed to know. 9 envelopes, 9 different violations, filed overnight. I sat on the porch bench as the sun crept over the ridge, warming the lake's surface but doing nothing to warm the feeling in my chest. One by one, I tore open the notices. Unauthorized shoreline rocks, failure to register watercraft, illegal dock maintenance, unapproved pathway gravel, suspicious activity near community water asset. That one actually made me laugh. The more I read, the more ridiculous it became. They were throwing everything they had at me. Fabricated rules, imaginary guidelines, even fines for visual clutter because my canoe sat near the waterline. Paper cuts, I thought. 1,000 little ones. Bethany was trying to bleed me out before the real fight even started. I stood and walked toward the lake, the morning air sharp with the scent of dew settling on pine needles. The water shimmered under the rising sun, calm and quiet. Too quiet. A shape moved near the far tree line. An ATV. Same one I'd seen yesterday. Its engine idled low, like a crouched animal. Someone was watching me through their phone. I raised my mug in their direction. The ATV didn't move. By lunchtime, the letters kept coming, hand-delivered by HOA volunteers who looked like they practiced frowning in the mirror. One woman left a notice wedged under a rock, then took a picture of her own delivery like she was documenting a crime scene. I muttered under my breath, "Must be exhausting being this petty." The real trouble started after sunset. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the steady tick of the clock the only sound inside the cabin. Outside, the wind pushed against the siding, and the moon cast silver streaks across the lake. I was half reading a map of the old dam structure, something my grandfather had drawn by hand, when a sound cut through the silence. A splash. Not the soft kind. A heavy, jolting one. I stood immediately. Another splash. Metal hitting water. I moved quietly to the window, lifting the corner of the curtain. At first I saw only darkness, then something moving in it. A small boat rocked gently near my dock. No lights, just the dull silhouette of a man crouched low. The moon shifted behind a thin veil of cloud, casting weak light across the water. Enough for me to see the man's hands working furiously at something tied near the pilings. He was cutting the dock ropes. My jaw tightened. Not only illegal, but dangerous, especially on a lake with changing currents. I grabbed my phone and tapped into the cameras I installed along the shoreline earlier that summer. I'd set them up mostly for wildlife, the occasional deer, a stray mountain lion passing through, maybe the neighbors' goats whenever they escaped their fencing. But tonight, the cameras captured something different. Crystal clear footage of a man in dark clothes, face obscured by a hood, sawing through the dock's rope with what looked like a kitchen knife. The cut was sloppy, amateur. When the last rope snapped, the dock lurched violently. The man nearly toppled in, swearing loud enough to wake the trout below. The small boat wobbled as he scrambled to start the old outboard motor. It sputtered, coughed, then finally kicked to life with a muffled roar. The boat spun awkwardly before he steered it into open water, disappearing behind a line of willows. I stepped onto the porch, phone still recording. The night air was cold enough to sting the lungs, carrying the smell of lake mud and fresh split pine. The dock drifted crookedly, bumping against a cluster of reeds a few yards out. I zoomed in on the footage. There it was, clear as day. On the saboteur's jacket sleeve, an HOA volunteer badge. I stared at the screen, the moonlight reflecting off the water and the growing anger simmering beneath my ribs. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't paperwork. This wasn't a neighborly disagreement about property lines. This was sabotage. I called Sheriff Marcus. He answered on the second ring. "Marcus," I said, "you're going to want to see what just happened." He arrived 20 minutes later, headlights bouncing across the trees as his cruiser came to a stop. He stepped out, coffee in hand, hat low, eyes scanning the lake. "Show me," he said. I pulled up the footage. Marcus watched silently, jaw tightening with each second. By the time the saboteur panicked and nearly dumped himself into the water, Marcus exhaled sharply. "That's an HOA badge on his sleeve," he said. "And not the first time they've sent someone sniffing around people's property." "Is this legal?" I asked. "No," he said flatly. "Not by a long shot." He leaned in closer, replaying the footage. "This wasn't random. Someone sent him. And I'd bet my badge it wasn't the HOA board as a whole." "You mean Bethany?" "I mean Bethany," he confirmed. We stood on the shoreline, the moon painting a pale trail across the water, the air cold enough to make breath visible. Marcus fixed his hat, his expression dark. "I'll file a report," he said. "But be careful, Remy. If they're already sabotaging your dock, I don't like where this is heading." "Neither do I." He nodded once, then turned back toward his cruiser. I watched him drive off, his taillights fading into the forest. The lake lapped softly against the loose dock, tapping it like an impatient finger. The sabotage wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that it proved something I already suspected. Bethany wasn't just trying to control the lake. She was trying to chase me off it, and something told me she wasn't even close to finished. By sunrise, Silvercrest Lake looked peaceful again. Soft mist rising off the water, pine shadows stretching long across the shoreline. The kind of calm that tries to convince you nothing bad happened the night before. The dock, however, floated crooked and useless, bumping gently against the reeds like a wounded limb. My grandfather would have spit nails at the sight of it. I stood with my hands in my pockets, breath forming clouds in the morning air, thinking through my next move. Fighting Bethany on emotion wasn't smart. Fighting her with paperwork, that was my advantage. My family didn't just build this lake. They documented everything. Deeds, maps, water flow diagrams, mineral rights. A handwritten ledger from 1893 filled with ink that still smelled faintly of coal dust. If Bethany wanted to make this a legal battle, I had more than a leg to stand on. I had a foundation. I grabbed the keys to my truck, the old diesel coughing awake as I backed out of the gravel driveway. The county courthouse sat a few miles down the two-lane highway, a red brick building with a tin roof and windows that rattled when the wind blew. I'd been there dozens of times as a kid, usually tagging along with my grandfather when he'd update water reports or property records. Inside, the building smelled exactly as I remembered: old paper, lemon cleaner, and a hint of stale coffee that probably lived permanently in the carpet. A clerk nodded me toward the basement archives. The basement was nothing fancy. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Filing cabinets lined the walls. Dust motes swirled through the air like they were searching for a way out. That's where I found Sarah Mitchell. She sat cross-legged on the floor among stacks of law books and rolled surveys, her blazer abandoned on a chair, sleeves rolled to her elbows. A pair of reading glasses perched at the end of her nose as she scanned a thick binder. She looked up when she heard my boots echo on the concrete. "You're Remy Cole," she said, not asking. "I am." I nodded. "You're the attorney Jake recommended?" "That's me. Land rights, water rights, and the occasional HOA nightmare." She stood, brushing dust off her jeans. "Jake said you had a real mess on your hands." "Mess is one word also," I said. "Sabotage, bogus fines, attempted theft, those work too." She raised an eyebrow. "Then let's make sure you have enough ammunition to end this." We spent the next hour digging through old deed books and county records. Sarah moved quickly, flipping pages like she'd memorized every index. I pulled out the ledger my grandfather kept. Inked diagrams of the dam structure. His neat handwriting noting water flow patterns, seasonal depths, agreements made with ranchers up the valley. Sarah skimmed the notebook and let out a low whistle. "Your grandfather was thorough. Not many folks documented riparian use like this back then. He didn't trust anyone to remember the truth unless it was written down." She smiled. "Smart man." Finally, she found what she was looking for: a brittle, yellowed sheet tucked inside a leather-bound deed registry. She laid it flat on the table and pointed to the header. "Deed of Water and Shoreline Rights, 1893, Silas Cole." The paper might as well have glowed. Sarah read it out loud, line by line. It was all there. Exclusive water rights, shoreline control dam, ownership. Flow authority, mineral access to 200 feet below lakebed, all rights extending to future direct descendants. In other words, the lake was mine. Completely. Legally. Irrevocably. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. This, Sarah said, tapping the document, is something an HOA can't override. Not with amendments, not with votes, not with 20 years of bad habits. I leaned forward, scanning every word. She told me the lake belongs to the community. Sarah laughed, a sharp, surprised sound. She can say whatever she wants. But this... She lifted the deed carefully. This is the kind of thing that ends lawsuits before they start. The fluorescent lights above us flickered again, buzzing like agitated insects. Sarah folded the deed into a protective sleeve. And here's something even better, she added. I cross-checked property lines using the county's GIS system. She handed me a printout of the shoreline map, modern satellite data overlaying the original handwritten boundaries. My eyebrows shot up. Bethany's lakefront mansion sat directly on the edge of my property. But more importantly, her dock, Sarah said, pointing, is built 5 feet onto your land. So is her boathouse, and a chunk of her fancy landscaping. I blinked, letting it sink in. The HOA president who keeps threatening you? Sarah said, crossing her arms. She's been illegally occupying your shoreline for at least a decade. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the irony was too heavy to carry without releasing some of it. She'll lose her mind over this, I said. Sarah shrugged. She can lose whatever she wants. You have the deed, the maps, and over 100 years of legal precedent. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the basement windows. It carried the smell of early winter. Cold, sharp, inevitable. Sarah slid the protected deed across the table toward me. Remy, you don't just own this lake. You own the argument. I took the deed, feeling the weight of it through the plastic sleeve. Not just paper. History, legacy, evidence, and leverage. That's not even the biggest twist, Sarah said. I looked up. There's more? Oh yeah. She pulled out a second map. The HOA's rule amendments. They were passed without proper homeowner votes. Bethany pushed them through by claiming emergency environmental oversight. That's illegal as sin. I let that sink in. She was overreaching on rules she never had authority to write, using power she never earned, chasing away people with nothing but a clipboard and a loud voice. Not anymore. I tucked the deed under my arm. Sarah, you free this afternoon? Why? Because if Bethany wants a fight. I paused as the cold air swept through the stairwell above us, stirring dust from century-old books. It's time she learned what she's actually up against. Sarah smirked. Now that's the spirit. Let's go educate an HOA. The truth wasn't just on my side. It was written in ink older than the HOA itself. But the moment we stepped out of the courthouse basement, winter wind slapped us across the face like a warning. Sharp, cold, impatient, as if the valley itself knew things were about to get worse before they got better. By the time we reached my truck, Sarah paused, her hair whipping across her cheek. Remy, when people like Bethany lose control, they don't back down. They escalate. I didn't know how right she was, until the following morning. The first sign was the county vehicle parked halfway up my gravel drive. A white pickup with the orange county inspection decal fading on the side. The engine was still running. 2 men stood near my porch scribbling notes on clipboards. I walked up slowly, boots crunching over frost-covered gravel. Morning, I said. The older inspector looked me up and down. Mr. Cole, we're responding to multiple reports of hazardous structures, unpermitted shoreline modifications, and possible septic violations. Reports from who? I asked. Anonymous, he replied. Of course they were. Sarah, who had met me at the cabin early, stepped forward. Do you have the complaint numbers? He handed one over. Every complaint was filed within the last 12 hours, and everyone listed violations that were simply impossible. "Sir," the younger inspector added, "we have to take water contamination reports seriously. Says here your septic could be leaking into the lake." I almost laughed. My septic system was replaced 5 years ago, state of the art, inspected twice. "Check it," I said, "all of it." If they wanted to poke around my property, I wanted them to see the truth with their own eyes. For the next 2 hours, I watched them crawl through my yard, measuring the dock, or what was left of it, thanks to last night's saboteur, testing the water by the reeds, checking seals on the septic tank, examining the shoreline for erosion-inducing activity. I documented everything, every step, every angle, every question, with my phone. While they worked, wind rushed through the pines above us, rattling branches like bones knocking together. A storm brewed on the horizon, clouds gathering in thick, rolling waves. Finally, the older inspector wiped sweat from his brow and approached me. "Mr. Cole," he said, "your property's cleaner than most places I inspect. Septic's perfect. Dock meets engineering standards. Well, aside from some vandalism. Shoreline's pristine. Frankly, I don't know why we're here." Sarah folded her arms. "We do." Before we could say another word, an SUV rolled up. Not just any SUV. Bethany's. It came to a stop at the top of the driveway, gravel spraying like gunfire. She exited with a folder tucked under her arm, shoulders stiff, jaw tight, not even pretending this wasn't about her. "Well, well," she said, hands clasped together like she was greeting children at a church bake sale. "County inspectors. Perfect timing." The older inspector flinched. "Ma'am, we were just finishing. No violations found." Bethany's face froze. "No violations?" she repeated, her voice flat. "Did you inspect the undocumented dock foundations?" "Yes." "And the septic contamination risk?" "Within perfect limits." "And what about unauthorized shoreline reinforcement work?" "There wasn't any." Her eye twitched, a small, involuntary movement that told me everything. For once, the clipboard queen didn't have the answer she wanted. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if the inspectors couldn't hear. "Mr. Cole, you can't intimidate county officials into ignoring violations." Sarah scoffed. "We didn't intimidate anyone. They did their job, and your anonymous complaints wasted taxpayer money." Bethany turned her glare to Sarah. "And you are?" "His attorney." That stopped Bethany cold. An attorney wasn't part of her plan. She tried to recover with a brittle smile. "Well, attorney or not, Mr. Cole is still subject to HOA authority, and as of this morning, due to repeated non-compliance," she opened her folder dramatically, producing a crisp paper with bold red letters across the top. "Foreclosure notice." I felt something inside me harden. Bethany continued, "You now owe the HOA $18,400 in accumulated penalties. If unpaid within 14 days, the association will pursue property reclamation procedures." "Property reclamation?" Sarah repeated, incredulous. "You can't foreclose on a lake owner based on fake violations." Bethany's lips thinned. "We follow our bylaws. If certain residents refuse to respect the community," I stepped forward. "Respect? You sent someone to cut my dock loose." She blinked. "Prove it." I pulled out my phone and opened the security footage. Her face drained of color. But before I could show more, the county inspector cleared his throat loudly. "Ma'am, this level of enforcement seems excessive." Bethany ignored him. "This conversation is over," she snapped. "Expect further action." She stormed back to her SUV and drove off so fast the dust didn't settle for a full minute. The inspectors exchanged a look, gave me their cards, and left without another word. Sarah turned toward me as the wind picked up, whistling through the pine branches overhead. "Okay," she said slowly. "That's it. She wants this escalated. So we escalate." "To what?" I asked. "To everything," she replied. "Paperwork, maps, deeds, the whole truth. She thinks she can bury you in bogus fines. We're going to bury her in facts." As the storm clouds thickened above us, the foreclosure notice flapped violently in my hand like it was trying to escape the wind. I stared at the lake, silver, restless, ancient. Bethany had declared war, but that meant she hadn't yet seen her biggest problem. I had more than evidence. I had heritage. I had law. And the storm she'd started was about to come right back for her. But storms, real storms, the kind that reshape a valley, always begin with a strange stillness. And for the next 2 days, Silvercrest Lake fell into one of the quietest spells I'd ever seen. The wind softened. The pines stood still. Even the wildlife seemed to wait. Only the HOA was busy. Every morning, fresh envelopes showed up on my porch. More violation notices. More urgent communications. More threats phrased in legal-sounding nonsense. Bethany's voice practically bled through the ink, tight, controlled, desperate. But she wasn't the only one preparing. Sarah and I turned my cabin into a legal war room. Papers covered the kitchen table, old maps, copies of the 1893 deed, engineering diagrams, county filings, boundary surveys, and a list of testimony from residents who'd been pushed out by the HOA over the years. Outside, the lake glowed silver under a low sky. Geese skimmed over the surface with barely a sound. Every so often, the wind would roll across the ridgeline, bending the tree line before fading again. It was the kind of quiet that makes your heartbeat sound louder. "All right," Sarah said, sliding a stack of homeowner complaints toward me. "Look at this. Every family forced into compliance over the last 5 years? Same pattern, same signature, same threats buried under polite language." She pointed at the lines with her pen, tapping the paper like a metronome. "Bethany started small," she continued. "A landscaping fine here, a mailbox violation there. People paid because it was easier. Then she got bolder. Boat fees, dock fees, water access fees. When no one pushed back, she grabbed more power." I shook my head. "All of it built on nothing?" "Less than nothing," Sarah replied. "She forged her own authority from fear, and people believed it." I spread out the deed between us. Even under plastic, the ink looked like a scar on the page. Old, stubborn, powerful. "Think this is enough to shut her down?" I asked. Sarah smiled. Not a hopeful smile, but a knowing one. "Remy, you don't understand. This isn't just enough." She tapped the deed. "This is a hammer, and Bethany has built her entire empire out of glass." Thunder rumbled far off in the distance, soft, like the edge of a drum roll. In the afternoon, Sheriff Marcus stopped by. He stepped onto my porch, shaking snowflakes off his hat. The storm front had moved in faster than anyone expected, thick clouds shrouding the ridge, the temperature dropping sharply. "I got more complaints today," Marcus said, closing the door behind him. His voice carried the weight of someone tired of nonsense. 3 from Bethany's number, one claiming you were attempting to divert water, another saying your property is a public safety risk. I blinked. "Divert water? With what? My bare hands?" Marcus sighed. "Look, she's spiraling, and when people like her panic, they start doing stupid things." "That worries me," I admitted. "It should." He lowered his voice. "This isn't about rules anymore. It's about control, and she feels it slipping." He walked to the table and studied the 1893 deed, leaning forward with both hands braced on the wood. "This thing," he said, "is the strongest document I've seen in years, stronger than anything the HOA could dream up." I nodded. Then let's make her see it. Marcus straightened. Careful. Show her too early, she'll double down. Show her too late, she'll torch the whole valley trying to keep power. I exhaled slowly. So what's the play? Build your case, he said. Gather witnesses, document everything, keep baiting her without letting her cause damage. Sarah crossed her arms. Already working on it. Marcus turned toward her. Good. Because the HOA sent 2 volunteer patrols down Oak Ridge Road yesterday. They were asking neighbors if you'd been seen tampering with lake levels. I stared. They're manufacturing rumors now? Trying to poison the well before the meeting, Marcus said. But you've got something they don't. A deed? A reputation, he replied. People know your family. They trust your name more than hers. He put his hat back on, pausing at the door. Be ready, Remy. The HOA's annual meeting is next week, and she's planning something big. After he left, Sarah and I sat in silence as sleet pattered against the windows. The lake darkened under the cloud cover, ripples shivering across its surface. Marcus is right, Sarah said softly. We need to prepare. All of this, every document, every video, every map, needs to be ready for that meeting. I picked up my notebook, the same one where my grandfather had drawn sketches of the dam's flow patterns. His handwriting looped across the page like a steady heartbeat. I traced the line of the dam structure, feeling the weight of generations behind me. Okay, I said quietly. What do we do next? Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a blueprint-sized document, rolling it open across the table. It was a survey map, detailed, precise, notarized by the county. This, she said, pointing to the bold red line, is the official shoreline boundary. I leaned in. A long silence filled the room. My God, I whispered. Her dock is on your land, Sarah finished. Not a little bit, a lot. And her boathouse crosses even farther. Thunder cracked overhead, rattling the windows. The third twist was forming. We weren't ready to reveal it yet. But it was there. Waiting. Growing. That night, with the storm fully overhead, I walked down to the water's edge. Rain misted against my face, cool and metallic. The lake churned under the wind, waves slapping against the damaged dock. I knelt and touched the water. A small gesture, but grounding somehow. My grandfather had done that whenever he needed to listen to the lake, as he put it. In the darkness, the storm whispered through the valley, bending the treetops and shaking loose old needles that scattered across the ground. Behind me, the cabin lights glowed softly. Inside was proof. Inside was strategy. Inside was truth. Bethany had chosen the battleground, but I had chosen the weapons. I stood slowly, rain dripping off the brim of my hat. Let the storm come, I said to the wind. I'm done being quiet. And the lake, timeless and ancient, seemed to agree. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the valley washed clean. The sky was the color of tin, streaked with faint silver where the sun tried to push through. Pine branches glistened with rain. Water dripped steadily from the roofline. Everything felt sharp, focused, ready. Sarah arrived before the coffee finished brewing, a rolled-up tube under her arm and a serious look in her eyes. This is it, she said. The piece we needed. I poured her a cup and nodded toward the kitchen table, still buried in maps, deeds, photos, and violation notices. She cleared a space and unfurled the tube, flattening a large paper across the wood. It was the official land survey, updated, notarized, irrefutable. This boundary line, she said, tracing the bold red stroke with her fingertip, marks your inherited property exactly as the county recognizes it. I leaned over the map. The shoreline curved in a gentle semicircle, just like it did in real life. My cabin sat back from the water, nestled between two ridges, and there, Extending past the boundary, bold, unmistakable, were structures that didn't belong. Bethany's dock, Bethany's boathouse, Bethany's landscaping, stretch of lawn, and stone path, all planted directly into my inherited land. I stared at the map in silence for a moment, then let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She put half her backyard on my shoreline. More than half, Sarah said. Her entire dock is a trespass. That's a massive violation, civil and criminal. Does she know? I asked. No, Sarah said, rolling her sleeves up to her elbows. She thinks because she pushed the HOA to adopt that fake waterway amendment, she controls the lake. She doesn't realize her own violations predate that by almost a decade. I shook my head in disbelief. All that bluster, all that talk about rules. She built her kingdom on sand, Sarah finished, and you now have the tide. We spent the morning gathering every piece of evidence we had. The kitchen table became a patchwork of county documents, time-stamped videos, topographical charts, and photos of the damaged dock from the sabotage attempt. I set up a monitor and pulled up all the recordings from my shoreline cameras. Together we assembled a timeline. Clean, simple, deadly. Violation notices, sabotage, illegal amendments, abuse of power, trespassing, fraudulent authority. Every blow she'd attempted to land, we turned into a weapon for our side. At one point, Sarah paused, rubbing her eyes. Bethany isn't just misguided. This is obsession. She's convinced herself she owns this lake, and anyone who challenges that fantasy becomes an enemy. I folded my arms. What she doesn't realize is this lake has a memory longer than her HOA's entire existence. Sarah smiled faintly at that, then snapped back into focus. The annual meeting is in 2 days. That's our stage. That afternoon, I took the survey map outside to compare it against the physical shoreline. Snow from last night's storm still clung to the pine needles, and the air held that crisp, metallic smell that only comes after a hard freeze. I followed the map, counting paces, lining up the landmarkers, boulders, old fence posts, the carved number on the tree my grandfather used as a reference point. Everything was exact. I stepped across the boundary. My boots sank slightly into softer earth, Bethany's expensive sod. Her landscaping was immaculate, unnaturally green even in winter, fed by an automatic irrigation system she installed without county approval. A stone walkway curved toward her boathouse. The lake lapped gently against the wooden beams. Then I saw it. A bronze plaque screwed into the side of her dock. Property of Lakeshore HOA. Authorized access only. I snorted. Talk about irony. This dock, this symbol of her authority, sat on my land, fed from my lake, supported by a water line my grandfather engineered. A wind rolled across the lake, lifting my collar and scattering old pine needles across her manicured lawn. The lake seemed to whisper something ancient, rising and falling with the breeze. This land remembers who owns it. As I returned to my cabin, the sound of tires crunching over gravel caught my attention. I looked up to see Jake Mercer pulling in, his old Ford rattling like it needed a prayer and a new timing belt. He hopped out, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. "Heard from the sheriff you've been collecting evidence," he said. "Thought you could use a witness." "Witness for what?" I asked. Jake scratched his beard. "The HOA messed with my place a few years back. Fined me for having an unauthorized barn extension. It wasn't unauthorized. My family built that barn in 1944. They forced me to pay anyway. Folks have been scared to talk because Bethany threatens them with fines." I gestured toward the cabin door. "Come on, we're building a case." Inside, Sarah looked up as Jake entered. "Perfect timing," she said. "We need residents willing to testify." Jake nodded and sat at the table. "I'm tired of being quiet," he murmured, "and I'm tired of watching her bully everyone around this lake." His voice carried the same tone I'd used the night before, a tone that meant something was about to change. By sunset, the storm clouds had cleared. The lake reflected streaks of orange and rose, broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish below the surface. The air smelled of thawing earth and wet pine, a smell that always felt like the valley breathing again. Sarah packed up her maps. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we finalize everything. After that, we wait." "For the meeting?" I asked. "For the collapse," she corrected. "She's built too much on lies. They never hold." I watched her drive away, taillights fading down the dirt road. The sky darkened. The cabin glowed with warm light behind me. I walked down to the shoreline, touched the water again, and looked across at Bethany's boathouse, its lights on, its structure standing proud and oblivious. She thought she owned this place. She thought she controlled the rules. She thought she could push anyone out. But she built her empire over my land, and in 2 days, that truth was going to break over her like a tidal wave. By the time the HOA's emergency environmental meeting arrived, the entire valley felt like it was holding its breath. Word had spread, quietly at first, then like a fire jumping ridge to ridge, that something big was about to happen. Neighbors who hadn't spoken up in years were suddenly stopping by my cabin, offering stories, documents, screenshots of threatening emails from Bethany. Folks who'd been beaten down by her rules finally felt a shift in the wind. "Feels different," Jake said that morning, standing on my porch with a thermos of coffee. Frost clung to the tops of the willows by the lake. The air smelled of cold iron and cedar. "Feels like people are ready to stop being scared." "They won't have to be scared after tonight," I told him. Sarah arrived shortly after, her SUV packed with boxes, neatly labeled, color-coded, everything a lawyer dreams of. She wore a heavy coat, a scarf, and that expression she only had when she knew she was about to dismantle someone with nothing but paperwork and calm precision. "This is everything," she said. "Recorded complaints, county filings, photos, surveys, maps, even statements from residents who moved away after being targeted." "And the deed?" I asked. She patted her briefcase. "Front and center. That's our lightning strike." We loaded the boxes into my truck. As we drove to the lake hall, a squat wooden building by the water with a metal roof and a flagpole that leaned slightly left, the sky darkened with thick winter clouds. The wind rushed down from the ridgeline, carrying the smell of snow and the faint tang of the lake. It wasn't just weather. It felt like anticipation. The parking lot was already full. Trucks, SUVs, sedans, lined up in rows that stretched into the dirt shoulder. Folks milled about the entrance, murmuring to one another, breath steaming in the cold air. Many glanced at me as I stepped out, some nodding cautiously, others offering quiet encouragement. Inside, the lake hall buzzed with tension. Overhead lights flickered. Folding chairs were arranged in rows, and at the front of the room stood Bethany, flanked by her board members, setting up poster boards covered in charts, maps, and red-circled violations. She'd come prepared for a spectacle. A local TV crew hovered near the door, adjusting their cameras. Bethany spotted me and stiffened. "Mr. Cole," she said coldly, "I didn't expect you to attend tonight." I gave her a calm smile. It would be rude to miss an event held on my lake. Murmurs spread across the room. She ignored them and turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this emergency session. Tonight we address a serious threat to our community's safety." Sarah leaned toward me. "Here we go." Bethany gestured toward her charts, clicking a remote. Images flashed on the projection screen. Pictures of my cabin, my dock, my canoe, my gravel path. She exaggerated every detail, speaking in that stiff, authoritative cadence she used whenever she felt power slipping between her fingers. "Unauthorized structures," she declared. "Environmental negligence." Unregistered water usage. Hostile behavior toward HOA representatives. I nearly laughed at that one. She stepped closer to the front row. This community cannot tolerate individuals who disregard our shared values. Mr. Cole's continued refusal to comply endangers our lake and our harmony. Harmony? Residents exchanged skeptical looks. Then she raised her voice. We will vote tonight on enforcing foreclosure proceedings. A freezing silence settled in the room. People didn't gasp. They just stared, stunned that she'd said it out loud. Sarah stepped forward. Excuse me, before any vote is held. Bethany cut her off. Only board-approved members may address the room. Sarah held up a folder. County law says any landowner affected by potential seizure has the right to counsel present. A wave of muttering swept through the hall. Bethany's jaw clicked. 5 minutes, she snapped. 4 is enough, Sarah said, walking to the front. I followed with the first box. Jake carried the second. A few neighbors instinctively stood up to join us, as if conscience finally outweighed fear. Sarah faced the audience. I'd like to present evidence regarding Mr. Cole's ownership of the lake. Bethany scoffed. We've seen his claims. His family's history does not supersede HOA jurisdiction. Sarah didn't respond. Instead, she opened the briefcase, removed a large plastic-sleeved document, and laid it gently on the table like she was placing a relic under glass. This, she announced, is the original 1893 deed, recorded by the county, verified by the archives. It grants full water rights, shoreline authority, dam ownership, and environmental control to the Cole family and to their direct descendants. The room fell into a silence so complete I could hear the lake wind pushing against the metal roof. Bethany blinked, unstable beneath her polished expression. That document, surely it's obsolete. Sarah lifted another sheet, the county's verification certificate. Not obsolete, she said. Still active, still binding, still beyond the reach of any HOA. Gasps spread through the crowd. One of the board members quietly stepped back from Bethany, as if proximity might burn him. Sarah continued. Furthermore, county surveys show that the HOA president's dock, boathouse, lawn extensions, and shoreline structures are built directly on Mr. Cole's inherited land. A murmur rippled across the hall. Someone whispered, She put her dock on his property? Another voice. Then she's the one violating the rules. The TV crew swung their camera toward Bethany. Her composure cracked. This meeting is out of order, she said sharply. I will not allow— Sit down, a resident snapped. Let them speak. Now her veneer of control was not just cracked, it was collapsing. Sarah motioned to me. I stepped forward, lifted the box of evidence, and set it beside the podium. The sound echoed through the hall like a gavel. These, I said, pulling out a stack of photos, are all the violations filed against me. None of them are real. Not one inspector confirmed them, and every complaint came from one phone number. Sarah held up the record. Bethany reads. Gasps again. A few people turned their heads toward her. Even her board members shifted uneasily. I continued. This isn't about community. It's about control. And it ends tonight. Bethany slammed her palm on the table. This is slander. Sarah lifted a finger. No. This, she pointed to the stack of county-stamped documents, is fact. For the first time, Bethany seemed small, cornered, her kingdom shaking. Then the doors at the back of the hall opened. Sheriff Marcus stepped inside, boots echoing across the wooden floor. The room froze. Sarah whispered, Right on time. Bethany swallowed hard. Sheriff, thank goodness, please escort them out. But Marcus didn't look at her. He looked at me, and then he spoke the words that made the entire hall go still. Bethany, he said, stepping forward, we need to talk. Right now. Gasps. Chairs creaked. People stood. Bethany's face drained completely of color. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. Because she knew. The storm she'd stirred, it had finally arrived. Sheriff Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet authority in his tone made the crowded lake hall freeze solid, like every person inside had turned to carved wood in the winter air. He stepped forward, boots thudding against old pine boards. His hat brim shadowed his eyes, but I could tell by the set of his jaw. This wasn't a friendly visit. "Bethany Reed," Marcus said, "I've got some questions about your recent filings, liens, and certain county complaints." The TV crew leaned in. Residents held their breath. Even the overhead lights seemed to buzz louder. Bethany swallowed, but her voice came out brittle. "Sheriff, I'm conducting a lawful meeting. These outsiders are disrupting official HOA procedure." Marcus cut her off gently, but firmly. "Bethany, this is no longer your meeting." A stunned ripple spread across the room. Her own supporters looked around, unsure of where to stand or even what they were witnessing. Sarah quietly nudged our box of evidence forward. Marcus turned to the crowd. "For weeks now, my office has been investigating a pattern of harassment, false reporting, and fraudulent documentation tied directly to Ms. Reed. Today, new evidence was submitted." He gestured toward me. "Evidence that includes recordings, timestamps, and county verification." Bethany's hands shook. "This is a mistake, a coordinated attack. None of this holds legal weight. I acted to protect the community." Sarah stepped beside him like a calm blade sliding into position. "Fraudulent liens aren't community protection. Filing a foreclosure on property outside your jurisdiction is a felony. And directing HOA patrol to trespass and sabotage someone's dock? That's tampering and criminal harassment." Gasps, whispers, a stunned, "Oh my Lord," from somewhere in the second row. Bethany tried to speak again, louder this time, like volume could rebuild her crumbling throne. "These accusations are fabricated. I followed procedure. Everything I did was to preserve our lake." "Our lake!" someone shouted. "You don't even own an inch of it." Another neighbor stood. "You tried to force out the Martinez family. Now this?" More voices joined in, voices that had been silent for years. Her supporters? Gone. Even her board members had stepped away, physically putting space between themselves and her. Marcus looked at her with the tired disappointment of a man who'd seen this kind of slow-burning corruption before. "Bethany Reed, you are under investigation for fraud, harassment, abuse of authority, filing false reports, and issuing unlawful liens." She froze, mouth open, no sound coming out. The crowd fell silent as Marcus lifted a folded paper from his jacket. "This is a preliminary warrant for evidence seizure, by order of the county judge." The room went dead quiet. Nothing but the hum of the lights, the faint hiss of winter wind slipping through the drafty window frames, and Bethany's shallow, panicked breaths. "No," she whispered. "No, you can't do this. I am the president of this community." Marcus nodded once. "That's the problem." He stepped forward, reaching slowly toward her wrist. By the book, measured, calm. Bethany jerked back. "Don't touch me!" Her voice cracked. The TV cameras zoomed in. Residents leaned forward. The moment stretched like the lake right before a storm breaks. Marcus didn't flinch. "Ma'am, don't make this harder than it needs to be." She took a stumbling step backward, bumping into her own poster board, which wobbled and fell, scattering her fake charts like fallen feathers. Her carefully constructed image was collapsing piece by piece. "I built this community," she hissed, voice shaking. "I held it together. Without me, this place will fall apart." "No," said a voice behind her. Mavis Lane stepped forward, cane tapping, eyes blazing. "You tore it apart. We're just putting it back together. Bethany looked around desperately, but there was no hand reaching out to save her. No board member stepping up. No ally. Not even a whisper of support. Just the echo of her own downfall. Marcus's voice came low and steady. Bethany Reed, you are hereby detained pending further investigation. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the hall like a hammer striking iron. She flinched. The room gasped. Some folks stared in disbelief. Others nodded with grim satisfaction. A few wiped tears, anger, relief, years of tension unwinding all at once. Bethany's voice broke. This isn't over. Marcus guided her toward the exit. It is. The doors opened to the frigid night air, wind sweeping inside and carrying the last remnants of her authority out with it. The cameras followed her every step, her perfect blazer rumpled, her silver hair wild in the wind, her eyes hollow. The white SUV she'd arrived in sat there like a monument to her arrogance. It would soon be evidence. The doors swung shut behind her. For the first time since I inherited the lake, the hall felt lighter, airier, like the weight of years had finally lifted off everyone's shoulders. But as the murmurs grew, Sarah rested a hand on my arm. It's not over yet, she said softly. The state will step in. There will be hearings, investigations, rebuilding. I know, I said, exhaling. But tonight? She smiled. Tonight, the lake took the first breath of freedom. Residents slowly approached me, some offering thanks, others shaking my hand, a few apologizing for not standing up sooner. You could feel something changing, something old and long overdue. Outside, the wind blew across the dark lake, rippling the water with quiet relief. The storm she'd stirred had finally arrived. But now the valley was ready for calm, and justice, real justice, was just beginning. 2 months passed, and winter melted into the kind of early spring that made the mountains blush with pink light at dawn. Mirror Lake still carried the bite of cold in its water, but something deeper, older, felt warm again. It was like the lake itself had been holding its breath for years, and only now finally exhaled. The dock creaked beneath my boots as I walked out toward the end of it. The old boards weathered but stronger than they looked, just like the people who lived around this lake. The sun rose behind the pines, scattering gold across the water, catching on ripples that shimmered like fresh silver. A loon called from somewhere near the north inlet, and the sound echoed gently across the calm morning. For the first time since I inherited this lake, it felt like home. Behind me, the laughter of families carried across the water. Real laughter, not the restrained kind people make when they're afraid of getting written up for it. Kids splashed near the shallows under the watchful eyes of their parents. A couple of old-timers cast fishing lines off the renovated community pier, rebuilt with proper funds this time. And on shore, near what used to be Bethany's private garden, a barbecue smoker puffed out a thin ribbon of blue smoke as neighbors prepared for the first Mirror Lake Community Day in years. A day without fear. A day without fines. A day where the lake truly belonged to everyone who treated it with respect. Sheriff Marcus wandered up beside me, coffee steaming in the cool air. Hard to believe it's the same place, sis, he said. It's finally breathing again, I replied. He nodded. The state wrapped everything up last week. Embezzlement, falsified reports, harassment, fraud, illegal liens. They stacked up enough charges to last her a lifetime. He took a sip of his coffee. Bethany won't be running anything but a mop bucket for a while. I didn't laugh, but I didn't feel sorry either. That kind of justice doesn't come with joy, just a quiet, steady sense of rightness. And the HOA? I asked. Rebuilt from scratch, Marcus said, under supervision for the next 3 years. And I'll tell you this, Mavis Lane runs a tighter ship than half the county administrators I've met. I glanced toward the grassy area near the gazebo. Mavis stood surrounded by neighbors, giving orders in that brisk, no-nonsense tone that could make a mountain shift if she wanted it to. I smiled. Figures. She caught me looking, lifted her cane slightly, and shouted, "You, Lake Boy, come taste the potato salad before these folks finish it." I held up a hand in acknowledgement, and she grinned. It was strange, how fear had turned into warmth, how a fractured community had become something whole again. A slow crunch of tires on gravel drew my attention back toward the trail. Sarah Mitchell walked toward the dock, her hands tucked into the pockets of a light jacket, wind teasing strands of hair across her face. "You planning on hiding out here all morning?" she called. I shook my head. "Just taking a minute." She reached me, standing shoulder to shoulder, looking out across the lake. The breeze rustled her jacket and carried the scent of pine, smoke, and the faint sweetness of thawing earth. "You built something good here," she said quietly. "I just protected what was already mine." She nudged me. "Not just yours, the lakes, the communities. Your family didn't just own this water, they stewarded it. And now you're doing the same." I glanced at her. "Couldn't have done it without you." She shrugged lightly, but I saw the pride tugging at the corners of her smile. "I'm just glad the courts recognized the deed for what it was. That 1893 document? It's practically a historical artifact." "And it'll stay that way," I said. "Protected." "Speaking of protected, the board approved your conservation trust." She turned toward me. "Remy, you're officially the chairman of the Coal Lake Conservation Trust." The words settled over me like warm sunlight. Feels strange to hear it out loud. "Feels right," she corrected. "Generations will thank you for what you started." Behind us, a burst of cheers went up as the kids pulled in their first catch of the morning. The sound carried across the lake like church bells. "Looks like they're ready for you," Sarah said, nodding toward the shore. "Yeah." But I didn't move yet. Instead, I looked down at the water, clear enough to see the worn stones beneath the surface, the ones my great-grandfather had stacked with his own hands. He couldn't have known then that his work would become the backbone of a fight 130 years later. But I think he would have been proud. I whispered, "We did it, old man." Then I straightened and walked back toward shore. Marcus peeled off to help with the grill. Sarah walked beside me, her shoulder brushing mine. Kids ran past us with dripping nets. Someone's dog barked happily at the edge of the water. And for the first time since the day Bethany Reed stepped out of her pristine SUV, holding a fine I never owed, the lake felt safe. The valley felt steady. The community felt whole. At the entrance to the celebration, a wooden sign stood freshly carved. Mirror Lake Community Day. Respect the water. Respect each other. Under it, smaller letters read, Coal Lake Conservation Trust, established 2024. I paused, hand brushing the carved wood. Sarah looked up at me. "Ready?" I nodded. More than ready. As we walked into the crowd, the lake glimmered behind us, steady, timeless, alive. They tried to control my lake. They tried to control me. But justice runs deep, deeper than water, deeper than fear, deep enough to outlast anyone who tries to dam it. And now, Mirror Lake was free again. If this story struck a chord with you, drop a simple justice in the comments so I know you're out there standing your ground too. And if you believe folks should never be bullied off their own land, hit subscribe and stick around. There are plenty more real American HOA battles and land rights fights to tell.